Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy. Lynn Johnson is my guest today. She's an award-winning speaker, best for the world entrepreneur, producer, marketer, and organizational development consultant. She's a lifelong theater artist and transformational facilitator, and her work lies at the intersection of arts, media, culture, and social change. Lynn has been a serial entrepreneur since 2006. Lynn is the co-founder of several successful social ventures dedicated to gender and racial justice. Most recently, she is the founder and CEO of Hella Social Impact, a Black and non-Black women of color-owned consultancy that lies at the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion and marketing communications. Hella works with brands and organizations to show up authentically and impactfully for racial justice. She's been based in Oakland, California since 2006, but recently, Lynn and her wife, Allison, moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she currently resides. They also live with their tween neurodivergent daughter and are receiving the rest and healing they deserve. When not working, Lynn enjoys living room karaoke, mixing up new cocktail recipes, and walking along the Rio Grande. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm so happy to be here.
And Lynn reminded me she's a repeat guest. It's been 5 years. Wow. A few things have changed since
oh my gosh,
2017.
Everything has changed, it feels like.
The halcyon days.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your background and how you first got interested in the work you're doing today.
Yeah, I was just saying to someone the other day how once you kind of identify yourself as a theater person, you're always a theater person. It's kind of part of your identity, even if you're not actually doing theater. So that's why it's in my bio, I think, and it's how I started everything as an actor and a drama teacher and a director, but I was also, I think, as a kid, super entrepreneurial, also without knowing what that word meant, and so I was always like the person to start stuff, and so I, when I did work throughout my 20s as an actor and a drama teacher, I was always thinking like, these skills that I'm teaching these kids, people need these skills for other things. We need these skills to be better people together, And so I transferred my work into working with nonprofit, primarily youth serving organizations, and training people in how to create environments where kids could thrive, and equitable environments and inclusive environments where kids could thrive and the youth workers who cared for them could thrive. And I think because I was the Black person on staff at my nonprofit, they were like, could you do facilitate workshops on, back then it was called cultural competency. You remember that? So how do you do cultural competency trainings? I'm like, sure. Okay. So that kind of spiraled into organizational development and all that kind of stuff. And so I've always kind of had my identity in my practice as a theater person and as an artist, and that be the basis of how I facilitate experiences and help folks understand what it means to come together in an equitable and inclusive community. So that's the through line of my background.
Yeah, and tell us about Hella Social Impact and what it is and why did you start it? Some of the things that you all do.
Yeah, so I was, Ryan, it was a pandemic career. It was a pandemic move in a weird way. So 2018, 2019 were really, really rough on my life. And they were really, and as a result, they were rough in my life because of family issues with my daughter, and that's a whole other podcast, so we can talk about that at some point. But as a result, they were really rough on my business. My previous business, Spotlight Girls, which you're familiar with, the roughness on my life was rough on my business. And then the pandemic came, and the previous business was about, having a camp for girls in space. And when 2020 hit, it was like, whoa, what's going to happen to all of that? And at that point, I had to make money, and I was, kind of using my experience doing org development, doing anti-racism consulting. I was doing independent consulting. I got a job at a marketing agency doing marketing stuff, actually, and I needed the job, I needed the money, and I was trying to figure out life. And in that marketing agency, I was working at this marketing agency in the middle of 2020. And when George Floyd was murdered, I was the only Black person on staff, and I had all this experience doing anti-racism work. And I told the founders, I said, look, you hired me to do marketing work. That's my job. Like, do not rely on me to do your anti-racism work right now. And they were like, yeah, they were actually quite respectful of it. But like, I saw this company and every other company, they were posting their Black squares on Instagram. Everyone was freaking out, trying to figure out what to do. It was almost like, and then I went back to the organization and I said, okay, everyone's spinning. I actually have a lot of experience here. You can pay me more money and give me and promote me to another position, and I can help you. And they did, which was incredible. and what wound up happening was I was one of just a few folks of color on the leadership team of our organization. And so it kind of, all the work fell on us. We were all women of color, and it all fell on us to really guide this organization and what they were going to do. And what happens a lot is we said, okay, if we really want to show up right now in this time for racial justice, we have to do these things. And they were, there was kind of like the, okay, but, right? And we're like, oh, okay, this is really hard work for these organizations. And so instead of kind of being inside of this one organization and spinning our wheels around that, what if we did this work on a broader level for other organizations? And the four of us, who were the women of color on the leadership team, decided to start our own thing. And that's how Hello Social Impact was born. So we left very amicably, but we decided, you know what, everyone's trying to figure out how to show up during this time. We know how to show up. People don't always believe us, but we know. And so let's bring our gifts to the large community. So that was at the end of 2020.
And how did it go in the first 6 months? Did you get this response you were hoping for? Was it still touch and go a little bit? What kind of was your early experience on positioning and et cetera?
Yeah, we actually started off really strong. We had a really, to this day, our biggest client came up with our first client. This is an organization, and I can talk more about who it is if you want, because I think that their story of success in terms of how do we actually become an anti-racism organization and anti-racist organization, I should say, and really make that commitment. The changes I've seen in that one organization, it's blows my mind.
If you want to talk about it, because you're basically hyping them. So
I'm hyping them, exactly. Yeah. The company is Akimbo. They are the producers of the Alt MBA, and they went through a lot of different things. And they're, a white-led organization, and they have just been willing to do the work, for lack of a better word. They've been really, we've gone through, now they've been our client for 2 years. And I see in working with them, I see the places where they are willing to kind of push past the discomfort, to push past the is that really what we have to do? Kind of those moments, and to get to the other side. And that's been really interesting, because we've also worked with clients where we've seen that end, right? We've seen them go, no, we can't do this. This is where, for whatever, we can talk more about those reasons. But so it's really cool, to be 2 years in and to see what success looks like and to see what failure, for lack of a better word, looks like. But so coming out in those first 6 months, there was a lot of interest, a lot of yes, we were the new kids on the block. There's a lot of that kind of it was a strong start. And I think that kind of it was closer to like a year or so later where it started to be like, oh, this is harder than we thought it was going to be.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious because there's maybe people listening to this podcast who are like, I think my company should get more involved in racial justice work. And what are the characteristics or the telltale signs, or what do you look for when, looking at an organization about whether they're like ready to do the work? And like, what are the things that give you the positive signs? Like, okay, this organization, then what are you sort of looking for? Like, oh, this organization is not ready.
Yeah. Well, there's like a long answer and a short answer. So like the not long answer, but we do have an assessment. So we have what we call the racial justice spectrum assessment, and it's based on our racial justice spectrum, which is the framework that we use to do our work. It's a very simple framework. We call it the Notice, Name, Dismantle Framework. And it's all about like, you're taking an organization through the process of looking, okay, first of all, like, what is your organization's ability to even like notice what's happening, right? To like know that systemic racism is a thing, to notice what's happening inside your company, who works there, who doesn't work there, why, et cetera. Going into naming, which is the kind of what we call like the messy middle, right? Like understanding how to take responsibility for harm caused, how to call out harm when it's caused, how to call folks into the conversation, all of that stuff. And then, of course, into dismantling, which is the, eliminating or radically changing systems that are harmful to Black folks and non-Black people of color. So we have an assessment that kind of measures where an organization is. And there are certain pieces of that we kind of consider like red flag statements. Like, for example, like one of the statements, for example, in the notice section is like, we recognize that systemic racism is a thing and it's harmful, like something like that.
Yeah, that would definitely be a red flag if someone's like, nope.
Right. If you're like, no, then we're like, okay, like you're not ready to work with us, right? So that's like a 45 question kind of thing, and that helps us understand. But then the short version of that is, there are some things that we're looking for, and the number one, I think I would call it, I don't know if I call it the most important, but it's definitely like the easiest to tell, is the level of commitment from whoever is in charge. That's key. So if you're a for-profit company, we're looking that like someone like at the top understands that this is an issue that affects the entire organization. Actually, it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit or nonprofit. If someone understands this is something that's not just like, oh, this is a side project that is going to be relegated to like the head of HR or like, the diversity committee or whatever it happens to be, right? Like I, as the leader or owner or whatever of this organization, is going to kind of be involved because I see this as something that is integrated throughout what we're doing. If that's there, yes. If that's not there, we have things aren't going to move the way that folks want it to. That's the key.
Yeah, and it's probably not just that the part of the indicator you're looking for is this person willing to put budget behind it, right? Because I totally support this. Can you do something for like, $1,000? You're like, are you serious? You like change systemic racism in the so
exactly. It's all the resource. It's money, it's time, and it's willingness to like be part of the changes made. You know what I mean? Like it's like willingness to sign off on policy changes within your organization. I think a lot of people think that things can happen, like that change can be made without change being made. That's for lack of a better word. I know it's not that that deep, but like I often say, I understand what it's like for people who are like personal trainers, or your clients come to you, you're like, I want to get fit, I want to change the quality of my life. And they're like, okay, you got to like work out, 30 minutes every single day at least. I was like, well, I don't really want to do that. That's really hard. And you're like, okay, well then you're not going to make this, you're not going to get where you want to go, right? So we pretty much do the exact same type of work. Like we say, like we're going to have to put in the hours and put in the hard work and put in the sweat equity, and people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. Okay, well, all right, that's your choice. But
Yeah.
you're not going to get what you want where you want to go.
Yeah, I remember doing some like Buddhist meditation stuff early on, and I just love the lectures by the Buddhist teacher. But then he's like, "Okay, meditate for an hour," and you're like, "Oh, I guess I'll meditate." It's like,
exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
But the talks are really interesting, but the meditation is not as fun.
Yeah, we get that a lot, right? Like we're, like we facilitate great sessions. We're fun people, we bring music to our sessions, and people are like, oh yeah, they leave with like, this feels so good. And it's like, okay, great. So now you put white supremacy on a slide and you get people like, okay, what is that? Okay, all right, good. I think I want that to be gone from my organization. Okay, good. So are you willing to, look at how perfectionism lives inside of you and how you run your team? Oh, wait, shoot, you're talking about me? Yeah, I'm talking we're all holding this together, you know what I mean? So that's the hard part. It's people don't like change, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing we've struggled with at Lyft, and you've probably seen in other organizations, is just, and I'm looking for your thoughts, is like the balance between what is the organization's responsibility or work to be done in the context of like a business organization, and then what is the balance between that person's like maybe personal growth edges or traumas or other things that they need to deal with outside the organization. And like, how do you figure that out when it's like a very blurry line? Do you have any like thoughts or principles, or like, how does that come up for you?
Yeah. I mean, what comes to me, the first thing comes to me around that is actually when you follow Ibram Kenny's work. And, I have like my kind of we all have our stack of books that have been most influential to how we do this work, right? So in his work, How to Be Anti-Racist, he states very clearly that like policy change comes first before like personal transformation, and how that's not something that we get backwards for the most part. So we go into organizations a lot and we think that like we hear, especially from like a lot of times we're like the HR person, right, is like hires us, whatever. And it's like, well, how do I bring everybody along? Like, how do I get everyone on the same page so that we can move this work forward? And so we get to say, oh, that's not going to actually happen, probably. Like that's not going to happen as neatly and cleanly as you think. You have to be willing to, like, as the organization, and that's why leadership is so important, is to say, we're going to put this thing in place, and then folks have to kind of catch up or not, which is really uncomfortable because it means like, oh, we might lose people. And we say like, yeah, maybe, obviously the goal is to bring as many people along as possible, but that might not happen, which bums people out. Adrienne Maree Brown, who I know is on your podcast, which I'm so excited about, one of the quotes that she has that inspires me is, we might not, I can't remember the exact quote, but something I heard her say on different podcasts, like, we might not all get there, and that's okay, but none of us will get there alone, and that's crucial. And so it's like how to create the environment, the way to create the environment for that individual healing and that individual work that you're talking about to happen is to like really create your organizational culture in a way that allows for that to happen. It allows space for people to be people, allows to center the most marginalized people and to center like their comfort and their needs for transformation. And like that involves certain, when I say policy, right, I'm talking about everything from, from operational human relations, HR policy to like how you run your meetings, like any kind of structures, any kind of system. So we do a lot. So our work actually over the last 2 years has really formed into, we do transformational culture work? How do you create like an intentional culture for this stuff to happen? And so it's almost like you kind of go, you do the outside first so that the inside personal work can thrive. Does that answer
Yeah,
the question?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Adrienne Marie Brown. One of the things that she has said before that I personally have struggled with is she talks about cancel culture and how it can feel good. But, her point was around if you have an abolitionist mindset around, say, abolishing police and carceral systems and supporting folks of color, maybe wrongly incarcerated, then you also have to have the same abolitionist framework towards people who make mistakes, who are just normal people. And it's like call out culture is sort of not giving the same grace or like empathy as we would to maybe folks that we are more like intellectually aligned with or something. And I always thought that was really powerful. And maybe you've heard that quotation or anything on that. But I will say from my own personal experience that it feels great to call people out and it should be done in certain ways. Like, right. Like this doesn't mean tone policing. That's obviously horrible, but it's much harder to actually call people in and build a relationship and show love and respect and empathy. And I'm curious, does Adrienne's quotation or what's been your experience with that journey yourself, like with calling in versus calling out?
Oh gosh, it's so the heart of it all, Ryan. It's really the heart of all this work because, like I think that listening to your question, we have a pretty shared definition of calling in versus calling out. So just to like make it explicit, like calling out is like, can you curse on this podcast? So it's like calling out, like you fucked up, you really messed up, like, especially like when there's harm caused, right? Like harm's been caused, we have to like nip that in the bud right now, right? Whereas calling in is like this thing, this is something you might not understand. This is something you might not know. And I need to like kind of bring you in, like if you're part of this with me, and calling in, like you said, is almost harder because it's like it requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of vulnerability. It requires, which is the two sides of the same coin, right? It requires a lot of willingness to like engage beyond all of the hiccups and all of the mistakes. And this is why the cultural work, the organizational culture work is so important because you have to kind of understand what you want your community to like look and feel and sound like, and like what are the values? How do you like live into your values? And then to me, it's like, okay, if you are in my community and we understand that we are sharing the same values, then we have a way to have the conversation around calling in. And if you don't share the same values as me and like, you're doing something totally different, then it's like, okay, like Godspeed. You know what I mean? So we call this at Hello, we call it organizational culture code. I think I got that term like years ago. My Spotlight Girls had a culture code. I love culture codes. Like it's like my thing. I think I got that term a long time ago from like Tony Hsieh in his book about Zappos. I think that's where the term came from for me. But I call them culture codes, and it's like, how do you say every organization like declares their values, right? But most organizations don't think about, okay, we have these values, then how do we actually live these values every day to get us towards the change we're trying to make? And that culture code answers that question. So when we do culture code work and this is something that we're kind of like now becoming kind of known for, people are like, okay, what's this culture code thing? Because it's like really exciting to people. It's like, okay, define what your values are and don't have a lot of them, because if you have too many of them, they can't be real because you're not paying attention to them. So you have like 4 or less and you have these values, and then you take those values as the foundation to ask that question, how do you live into these values? And if you're committed to anti-racism, right, how do you live into them in a very equitable, inclusive way towards whatever you're doing in the world, right? Which is like your mission or whatever, your vision statement. And so when you have this culture code, it's almost like it's a guide, it's a path, it's a way of being. And so you start to see really clearly like who's, I don't want to sound like inclusive, like, or exclusive, right? Like who belongs and who doesn't. Because like the point is that you're making space for belonging. It's almost, it's, there's so much to say about this question, Ryan. You asked the question I know a long time ago, and I'm talking in circles. I feel like I'm not talking in circles, but I'm talking in balloons because there's so many pieces of this. People think that if you're going to create an organization that's about inclusion and belonging, then it has to be super big and wide, and you can't have any boundaries. But it's the exact opposite is true. You have to define who you are and what you believe in so that the exact right folks that need to be with you are with you. And so it feels like so calling in is like calling in the people who you can really trust and work with and leave others who aren't on that path with you to their own path.
Yeah. It's lovingly letting others who would have a different path go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, at Lyft,
exactly.
we talk about like you have the value and then you have the habits and behaviors and norms, which are the like how the value looks like in real life and having agreements about like what those are. Because if you just say, I value independence or love, it's like, okay, what does that look like at our company? You know, it sounds like that's what you do too. Yeah.
That's the culture. See, that's your culture code. That's what we would call it. Yeah. And that's what, in my opinion, from having worked with Lyft over the years, you can feel it. Like you can feel when a company has done that kind of work because there's consistency, right, in how you talk and how you work, right? And you can feel when there's inconsistency. You say it all the time, right? When you say you value this, but I'm not seeing that. And so you need that, like, you need that, especially in anti-racism work, to like walk your talk that way, and you have to define it because what you're doing is so countercultural, really, right? Like you at Lyft and other organizations who are like in this work, you can't assume everyone knows what you're talking about because you're like very specifically breaking down dominant ways of doing business, and so you have to define it. You can't. Because we're all practicing it, we're all messing up all the time because we're unlearning what we've been taught. Yeah.
I'm curious, we talked about it briefly before we started recording. You're working on something called the Hella Community. I'm wondering if you can tell folks what that is and what it's all about.
Yeah. So another thing that we've learned, so like I said earlier, like, as we ran in, we got our first client, we got some clients and we're like, okay, what's going on here? We realized that in every organization that we worked with as like kind of, relatively traditional organizational consultants, there's always like that one person or that one team inside of an organization that's like holding everything. Like they're holding all of the anti-racism work. And they're the people who are like, they're often the Black folks, the non-Black folks of color who just through lived experience are like, this is all messed up and what is going on here? Or they're sometimes the white folks who are the allies and co-conspirators or even like the ones who are budding allies who are like, wait a second, does no one else is seeing that we're not talking about A, B, and C, and they're really like, they can see the whole in what their organization is doing. And so those have kind of become our people, for lack of a better word. They've become like, everyone has some level of leadership or influence in their organization. And so we decided that we wanted a space for those people because it can feel sometimes pretty lonely, even as like for the white allies in the organization, like when no one's talking about what you're talking about or thinking about what you're thinking about in terms of anti-racism. So the Hella Community brings those folks together. It brings together like professionals, individual professionals either inside of large organizations or perhaps like individual entrepreneurs who are growing their own thing, creators who are growing their own thing, who are like, I need a space to talk about this because it's not being talked about where I am. And it's a digital community, an online digital community for folks who are committed personally to showing up for racial justice as a professional. So it's definitely a professional community. And we provide the connection to each other, resources, inspiration, online courses to like figure out like how do I take what's out there and either bring it back to my organization or put it in the organization that I'm building as a budding entrepreneur. So that's what the Hell community is. And we just actually started a beta in March with about 30 folks. And then we're just kind of opening it up to the public. And it's really exciting to see how folks are really using their connections to the community to like go back out and do the things they're doing. So I feel like it's these individual leaders, because they might leave their organization, you know, they might be like, what this is, y'all are not going to catch up with me. I'm going to go start my own thing, or I'm going to go to an organization that's more committed to this. And so we want to stick with those leaders and give them the tools to keep asking the questions, keep calling people out, calling people in. So yeah, I'm very excited about it.
Yay. And where can folks go to learn more about, you know, the community and some of the other work that you all are up to? Like,
yeah, the best place would be to go to our website, hellasocialimpact.com. And right there on the front page, there's information about the community, as well as information about, you know, who we are and how we work with organizations as well. To still have our organizational clients. So yeah, hellasocialimpact.com. And also finding us on LinkedIn at Hellas Social Impact and Instagram.
Yes, all the socials.
Yep.
One or two other quick questions. What do you need right now? You know, obviously, help folks signing up for the community sounds like a cool need. But generally, like, what else do you need right now, and how can the listeners help you grow the next economy?
I love that this is your question. You ask this a lot, right, to all your guests. I love that. When I listen to the podcast, so I'm honored to be asked the question now. I think signing up for the community, like you said, is not just a need because it's my business and it's how I pay my bills, but it's also because it's connected to, like, as a queer Black woman, like, I need people to do this work as practice. Like we were saying, like, you can't just listen to the Buddhist lectures. You have to like do the meditation, right? So when we're all practicing this together, it helps me as a person understand that like there are people out there who take this work very seriously. So signing up for our community or like doing the practice, however you want to do it, like I just need that. Like I need that. And that's very sincere and heartfelt. In terms of Hella and our organization, I would also say like needing to really hear stories about people like organizations like Lyft or other organizations or like our clients at Kimbo who are like doing the work. And like, I need you all to talk about the work that you're doing. Sometimes some of the organizations or organizational leaders who are doing the work the most talk about the least because there's like the humility to it. You know, there's like well, I don't want to be performative. I don't want to, show that, we're out there to try to get, but we need you to tell your stories actually publicly because that's where the change happens. Like we need to know, people ask all the time, like, what does it look like when an organization has done this work? And we need, because at the heart of what we do, we're storytellers too. So we need as many stories as possible. So if you're out there, like, and you're, you might not, I know you're not all the way there yet. Like you can't like declare like we have fully achieved equity in our organization. That's okay, but still tell your stories, centering, Black and brown folks for sure, but like tell your stories because the field needs it.
Yes, absolutely. It's like do some work first and then tell your story, right?
Yes.
Don't talk about it too early.
Not too early. That's our little catchphrase, actually. If you go to our website, you'll see that. Do the work, tell your story, And that's where we say, and that's where trust is earned, right? You have to kind of go back and forth. Don't do the work too early, like, because there's lots of stories being told way too early, right? We saw that in 2020. Like, we've made this, we put the statement on our website, and then what? Cricket. So we want the stories like, okay, we went through this process. It was really, we want to hear your failures too. This was really hard. We lost this person. You know, I was really upset and uncomfortable. This person, these Black people left, but then we did this thing. And now this is how we're feeling. And things are different. Things have shifted. Like, we need those stories. There's not enough of them out there.
I love that request. So thank you. And Lynn, thanks so much for joining. And you really encourage listeners, check out hellasocialimpact.com. I'm really intrigued by this community. And yeah, just thank you for being my friend and showing up for the second time on this podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much. And I'll see you in 5 years.
Before then. Okay, thanks. Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.